Joining me is Professor Wayne Lesperance of New England College. He's Professor of Political Science. And so, Wayne, let's sort of delve past the national stuff for a second and get into the next biennium.
Sure.
How does Maggie Hassan govern in an environment where the Republicans have the House, Senate, and she's got the governor's office?
Right. Well, the first thing is the dust hasn't settled yet on all the races. We don't know all the results.
Well, that's right, because we're taping on Wednesday, the day after the election, but it's...
Well, we know that it looks like the Republicans have the House, have the Senate, and I think there's a 3-2 advantage on the Executive Council. So she's dealing with a lot of Republicans. Let's think of it that way. We don't know who the leadership's going to be. There's a big push for Lori Sanborn, pretty conservative person, for Speaker of the New Hampshire House, and so this presents some interesting opportunities. My sense is that Maggie Hassan is going to make a strong push for a cooperative approach. She kind of has to at this point. The question is are Republicans going to be willing to receive that and willing to work with her? There are some real big issues that we face. And look, John, one of the big outcomes of this election, nationally and locally, is a rejection of government. People basically saying, we're not happy, we're angry. And while everybody talks about, coming out of a recession and economic improvement, people aren't feeling it. So they're looking to their government for some results. And so my sense, if I were advising Maggie Hassan, would be to say we've got to make a big push for results-oriented opportunities with the legislature. And I think they're going to be looking for opportunities where they can work together and come to some kind of a compromise. Taking it back to a prior conversation, if she really does have Senate aspirations, one of the things that she wants to be able to say is, I worked across the aisle. I worked hard with Republicans to get a budget, to get all of these things that we need to see some action on, generating jobs, things like that. Being able to take that message into a Senate campaign and distancing yourself perhaps from the polemics of the last cycle would be a really smart thing, and I think that's what we should expect from her.
Yeah, I want to talk about the budget. I interviewed a number of candidates, and that was one question I always went back to. We're going to start out the next biennium in New Hampshire with an $80 million, $100 million deficit we have to work out. I don't know whether the casino group prevailed or didn't prevail.
Right.
How does she reach us? How do they close that sort of gap?
The Republicans are going to say, you're going to have to cut some things. And she has come out pretty strongly in saying, well, I'm willing to have those conversations, but there are certain areas I'm not willing to cut. Mental health care, for example, education.
Well, the mental health care, didn't we just lose a lawsuit over some of the funding there?
Right. And so there's any number of ways in which you can begin to cut the pie up, but there's only so much pie, and that's a pretty significant gap. One argument she's going to make, I'm sure, is that we can grow our way out of it, but that's a very optimistic, I think, idea that who knows? The
Republican leadership, as I looked at it the last couple of bienniums, have been very conservative on what the budgets were, but they've been reasonably accurate in their revenue forecasts.
Right.
And it would be one thing if they were conservative and wildly off.
Right. We're not ending up with a huge surplus as a result of their efforts, right?
Right.
So they are austere in their budgets, conservative in their budgets, and it's reflecting reality. I think that's a chip on their side going into these negotiations with her to say, look, we've been spot on basically with our projections. We're going to have to make cuts, and this is what the whole ballgame becomes about: is which groups aren't going to get as much or anything if we do end up through some rounds of cuts. It's a big chunk of money in a relatively small economy. I don't know what the answer is. I think the answer, if you want any political cover, has to be something that's done jointly. But if Republicans use this as a way of leverage, which they certainly can, this could get pretty ugly pretty quickly, and all efforts at bipartisanship go right out the window.
Will the Republicans lead their individual caucuses more aggressively, do you think, or will they also know or think that we need to moderate and reach across the aisle as well?
That's a really good question. That's a good question nationally. It's a good question locally. New Hampshire tends to have a bit more of a libertarian, independent, Tea Party streak than, say, nationally we do in terms of Republicans. So I think there's going to be a real temptation to embrace the firebrands of the party. But again, this gets down to who the leadership is.
But the last time the firebrands were embraced in the Republican Party, the next election, they
They got creamed.
They got destroyed.
Although, if you ask Bill O'Brien, he would say they had a very successful legislative session under his leadership. So whether it's legislating or running for office, they would separate those things and say we were excellent legislators. The voters just didn't appreciate what we did. It's a bit of a disconnect, right? Because if you're a legislator, in the back of your head is always, I've got to run for office again.
Well, and I would think it's the voters approve what I did by voting for me again.
Sure.
To some degree.
Sure.
And if the voters, I mean, I guess that, to me, that's what the Democrats, I think they try to
A rational
moderate.
assessment would be that to come to that conclusion, but I think others would say, they'll look at that and say, well, look, we lost because Barack Obama did very well in New Hampshire. It had nothing to do with us. It was a wave.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can parse this any number of ways, and I think they do.
Right, we're out of time with that.